This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I am really happy that Sanjeev Sanyal needs no introduction, an old friend of mine, and of course, one of the most vocal technocrats of the incumbent government in India, has joined me in conversation. There's much to talk to Sanjeev about, but we'll focus on three major things today. One, of course, is his comments and thoughts on changing demographics not only in India but around the world. We will also talk about this idea of building Indian big four or big seven consultancies, and of course his other landmark project, the stint ship. Sanjeev, welcome.
It's a pleasure, Indol. Great to be on the show.
Sanjeev Sanyal, of course, spends all his time working at the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and one of the things that he's been talking about a lot these days is about changing demographics. So I will begin there. And Sanjeev, I want to begin by asking you, at one rate, of course, India's population is going to grow for a considerable amount of years going forward, but overall, of course, we are under 2.1. Now we're in this odd situation, Sanjeev, where our cities are becoming, are bursting at their seams, and yet we do have a mid to long term demographic problem. Talk to us a little bit about this and what you think are the solutions.
Well, I began talking about this demographic issue some almost 20 years ago, making the point that this alarmist Malthusian thinking that the UN and others were pushing, that human population would keep growing past 2100, that it would eternally keep rising, is wrong, because there already was 20 years ago a lot of data and information pointing out that, look, once you become past a certain threshold of income and education and urbanization, birth rates decline very, very fast. We have seen this. It doesn't have to be a one-child policy. Even in countries with no one-child policy, in Europe or Japan or South Korea, there has been massive declines in birth rates and fertility. And so this was visible 20 years ago. Now, about 15 years ago, I did a series of papers. One of them is called The End of Population Growth, when I was in Deutsche Bank as a working paper there. In fact, I had to do a series there called The Wide Angle. And then I later did another one with a more detail in 2013 called The Predictions of a Rogue Demographer. And those papers became quite popular. They were quoted in pretty much all the global press, FT, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever. Basically, the point I was making is that most of the projections we make for these forecasts assume that fertility rates, once they've gone down, eventually come back up to the replacement rate of 2.1. First of all, I don't think 2.1 is the replacement rate. I think it's somewhat higher. But let's take 2.1 as the rate. Now, in almost everywhere in Europe, the best they have done is in the Nordic countries, where it is stabilized at 1.6, and other places kept going down. In fact, in South Korea, it's gone down to 0.6 now. Now, I want to point out that this is a serious issue, because if your fertility rate, i.e. the number of children born per woman, is down to 0.6, when you need 2.1 to keep it stable, means that within one generation, your population will drop by 2/3. Okay? Now, the problem is it doesn't become obvious in the beginning, because the impact of that shows through many decades later. Because for the time being, people are still around. And in fact, your population may keep growing because people are living longer. So, what is population? The inflow of children and the people who die. If people are dying later, then for a period of time it will seem that population is doing fine. But at some point the old people begin dying. And at that point in time, suddenly your population begins shrinking, which is what is already begun happening in Japan and certain parts of Europe. But this is a very powerful thing. And it's difficult to undo, because let's say China today, it's already gotten rid of the one-child policy. Once society changes and you have a generation who's born without having siblings, the social structure that keeps higher birth rate simply goes away. So in China, they have discovered, they got rid of the one-child policy, but their birth rates kept falling. And now what happens is, let us say, even if they succeed in reversing this, the benefits of that will not show up for another 25 years because, you will begin to have children from now. They will reach, some 25 years from now, they will presumably produce their children. So the turnaround is at least 25 years. And during that 25 years, you actually have to withdraw more people out of the workforce, whether it is women or child caregivers, medical, school, whatever. You have to pull people out of the workforce to take care of those children. So ironically, not only is this very difficult to reverse, if you succeed in reversing, you will end up actually having a lot of pressure on your workforce and your resources. So once you tip over, it's a very difficult thing. Now, when I began talking about this 15 years ago, I also pointed out that this will eventually happen to India as well, that we are not immune to this. And this is precisely what has happened. For India as a whole, the total fertility rate, i.e. the number of children per woman, is down now to 1.9. And the only reason it is at 1.9 and not lower is because of UP and Bihar. Large parts of southern India, but also other parts of India, say for example our common state of West Bengal, are now somewhere in the 1.6 range, which is in the range of where Japan, etc. are. Urban Bengal is 1.2. So the point I keep making is that, at this rate, the Bengali Bhadralok will go extinct. Because if you combine this birth rate and out-migration from Kolkata to other states and other parts of the world, the Bengali Bhadralok will go extinct. So now these are statistical points. It's not even an opinion. And I'm just presenting this for the last few years. And now more and more data is coming. So there's now a UN report that just came out, which suggested that, look, we are at 1.9. But what is interesting in that report, if you read carefully, is one of the reasons it has fallen to 1.9 is India is one of the few places where the government and the medical professionals are still advising families to have fewer children because of the presumption that population control is a good thing. Whereas in India, we are already not replacing ourselves. To the extent we are seeing any population growth, which is, by the way, quite slow now, it's only 0.3% or something per year and it's falling, it is happening because we are living longer. So, reproductively speaking, we are no longer reproducing ourselves. The number of children peaked 10 to 15 years ago. So, this is an obvious point, and I am amazed that I have to debate it.
What is the mid to long-term solution, Sanjeev? And the reason why perhaps you're having to debate it is because people cannot see beyond their immediate circumstances often, and they obviously see these terribly difficult cities, many of them where things are very crowded, there's always a pressure, water supply is becoming lower, all kinds of other problems, air pollution, this, that and the other. But of course they don't realize, as of course you're pointing out, that all of this takes about 2 decades, if not 3, to really come into force, and once it comes into play, there's no turning back. So what do we do? I mean, in a sense, what is the solution?
So first of all,
we know that
let us separate
China.
Yeah. So first of all, please separate your urban management problem from the demographic problem. Okay? We have this impression that our cities are overcrowded. No, they are badly managed. Okay? Just go to the top of any building in Singapore, then come back and go to the top of a building in Mumbai. You will discover shockingly that Singapore is more densely packed than Mumbai. Large parts of Mumbai are actually empty. Not only talking about Borivali National Park, there is, the entire eastern seaboard is the Port Trust land, it's empty. So much of the problem is poor urban management. Yeah, and by the way, in just the last 10 years, the traffic situation in southern Mumbai has improved. Has this been because of out-movement of people? No. In fact, there are more high-rises in Worli today, which you can see from the ceiling, than there were 20 years ago. but the traffic has improved. Why? Because you have better infrastructure. So the problem is an infrastructure building problem. It is not a crowding problem. I keep making this point. It's pretty obvious, but if you go to most Western cities, they are not necessarily spread out. They have lots of people. Hong Kong is much more densely packed than any Indian city, and yet there is it functions.
And Tokyo, Tokyo being the great example. 40 million people in Tokyo.
Yeah, Tokyo has 40 million people. That is more than the 27 million people in Delhi NCR, which is our biggest city, and it still functions. So let us not confuse our urban management or mismanagement with the problem of demographics. Number one. Number two, it is important to notice that, okay, let us say you do want to stabilize your population, which is fine. It would be one thing if it is done in a smooth way. The likelihood, unfortunately, is that it will not happen in a smooth way. You'll have parts of the country, for example, the south, which will have huge shortages of people. Now, either they give up on growing or they decide to import people. When people get imported, where will they come from? The places where they have more children, which is UP and Bihar. Then you will complain about language, culture, all kinds of things. So, the point I'm making is that, look, actually our demographic problem would have already been on our head, but for UP and Bihar. And so rather than complain about UP and Bihar, the states where the birth rates have crashed should actually begin to do something about it. And I'll give you one example. If you just go through major towns in Kerala, take Thrissur for example. Thrissur is the financial and intellectual capital of Kerala. Okay. Now you go there. There are beautiful bungalows there, a lot of them belonging to wealthy families, particularly Syrian Christian families and others as well. Now, irrespective of which community they are from, they have lovely bungalows. All of them live in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, or now their children have moved to the West. At best, those bungalows have a few aging grandparents. Now, after this, they're going to be just empty. So this problem already exists. There are many places, and this is not just about the south, this is already true even in the north, in places like Himachal. In Himachal, one major problem is you don't have enough children, so you have large number of schools which do not have minimum quantum of children to keep those schools running. Now, you see, people get very emotional when you try to merge schools in order to have minimum threshold of activity. But in fact, that is the only thing you can do. So we have to get used to discussing this issue. That we too are aging. You see, we keep fooling ourselves saying, oh, the youngest country in the world. First of all, we are not the youngest country in the world. There are countries in Africa, there is Pakistan, there is Philippines, which is younger than us. Secondly, even though we are younger than the West or East Asia, we too are aging, and we need to begin to think in those terms.
Do you fear, Sanjeev, that our aging problem, which of course will, because of the difference between the two countries, will obviously hit us later than China, but we might well be less prosperous than China when it actually really hits us?
No, it is possible. It is possible. We have a 25-year odd gap between our demographics cycles. Plus ours, to be fair to us, is somewhat smoother. So it doesn't spike up the same way China's does. So it's somewhat smoother and about 25 odd years later. So we will be in 25 years, 2040s, late 2040s, we will be where China is today. But, it is soon enough that we are likely to be around to see this happen. And those who are young in the 20s will live most of their lives in that downslide environment.
It's interesting, you're talking about a whole generation which we will see India, which again has maybe, a billion people or 1.2 billion and going down, so to speak. Uh,
No, so the fall will happen
policy terms.
a little. Yeah, so the decline in population may take a little time. It will stabilize and stay there for a while, because I think because our longevity is low, so we will be living longer as well. So that decline of overall population may take a little bit longer than the reproductive cycle demographic peak issue. So, but they shouldn't be confused. Having an extra person hanging around at 80 is quite different from having an extra person at 25.
This has many policy implications, Sanjeev, but I will ask you about one of them, which is this: if you put this issue side by side with this entire conversation about how many jobs will AI take away and what will AI bring, and how many jobs will really be available for people, and we intermesh these two issues together, how do we make sense of these two? Do you think, in a sense, that because AI is going to supposedly take away so many jobs, in a sense, a declining population might be helpful?
First of all, I actually totally disagree with this interpretation of technology. When the spinning wheel was made and the first machine-made cloth was came into being in the late 18th century, early 19th century, everybody thought, oh my God, what will happen now? So many jobs will go. Actually, machines created lots more jobs, particularly in the UK. And since then, every technology that comes, everybody says, oh my God, what will happen to all the horse cart fellows when you had steam engine? Then when the steam engine came and you had cars, everybody, oh my God, what will happen to all the train drivers? So every technology goes through this cycle, and somebody will say, oh my God, what will happen to all the people who are... But in fact, there is no evidence to suggest that 200 years of technological growth has led to fewer jobs. In fact, we are busier than we were 200 years ago. I can assure you, somebody in 1750 was a lot less busy than I am today, or the average human being on the planet is today. And so jobs always get created. What happens is certain kinds of jobs get replaced by other kinds of jobs. So I am 100% sure that artificial intelligence will create lots more jobs. It's just that I have no idea what those jobs are. But jobs will come. And it will also simultaneously destroy a whole bunch of jobs, which is also what technology does. But at no point in time has this led... There's no technology that has overall destroyed jobs so far. This may be the first one, but there is no evidence so far of technology destroying jobs. So having made this point, let me say that we are actually in a very good position, because the jobs that it will destroy, AI will destroy, are not very low-end jobs. It's going to destroy jobs like those of lawyers and accountants and those kinds of jobs. These are actually high-end jobs, which in India we have, this is not where the big pain in the system is with, semi-skilled labor, etc. They are not getting replaced at all. Okay, your carpenter is not getting replaced by AI at all. Now, so what will happen is that here we are still young enough that the next incoming pipeline of accountants, lawyers, etc. will get culturized into a world that is already AI run. So far from being a problem, we should actually think of this as an opportunity for us to do to services what China has done to goods and manufacturing. Because basically our relatively young pool of these white collar jobs are now coming into the field. They don't actually exist in many places yet. They are still in school or college or whatever, and they will be coming out into a world where this is all those jobs are already set up with AI as a partner in the system. So they will have force multipliers and be used to the new tools. So there is an opportunity for us to simply replace these white collar jobs in the rest of the world. You're already seeing this happening with GCCs. Right? Every major company in the world has a GCC in India. These GCC are hiring young people. These young people are being equipped with the latest tools. So my own sense is that this is a game in which we can actually win. And rather than hide from this, we should try and embrace it.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, I remember 10 years ago or 15 years ago, even when we first met, I mean, there was all this talk about the fact that books will disappear entirely. And I recently read that not only have they not disappeared, you know, there are new bookstores, for instance, being opened, only that their shape, form and tone, tenor are very different. They are almost like, you know, cafes and luxury spaces for people to rest.
Not just that, the book sales have dramatically gone up. So,
That's right.
You and I are both writers. Let me tell you, our book sales would have shocked an earlier generation of writers who would have been very pleased with 10,000 books sold. Now, you and I don't think very much of a sale figure of 10,000. But, you know, just a decade ago, 10,000 was considered a super bestseller.
Correct. That's right. And I mean, I even saw a period very early in my career where in Delhi, 2,500 copies was considered a huge bestseller. So, you know, we've come a very, very long way from that.
We are beneficiaries of this situation. All that has happened, more people have, more people have got educated, more people are reading books. There is a proliferation of literature festivals, so much so that I, or you for that, I'm assuming, can't keep up with them. So in fact, I refuse 80% of the times I am requested to go to a book literature festival. So in fact, the one group of people which you would have predicted to have gone completely wiped out by this phenomena of, you know, nobody has enough attention to read a book and all these kind of things you hear. I'm sorry, people are reading my books. I don't seem to have a problem. You don't seem to have a problem. So who are these people who write these unreadable books? That's their problem.
Quite right. No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. There's been an absolute sea change for the better. And that actually brings me to the next topic I want to discuss with you, which is also a different field where there are a lot of naysayers, always this idea that it will always be in the control of a few hands, but the need to develop great consultancy firms in India. A lot of people complain that the Indian government has too many people working from these big four consultancies at various levels, and how India needs to indigenize this process and get homegrown firms. Talk to me a little bit about this.
So, you know, globally, there's a whole audit and consultancy business. Now, this business is a huge business. There's something like somewhere between $240 and $280 billion industry globally. And it's important here, people tend to confuse audits with consulting. Audit is actually just 10 to 15% of this. So 80 to 85% of this space is basically consulting of various kinds. So there can be business consulting, there is tax consulting, there is some engineering and all kinds of consulting, cyber security consulting and so on. Now this business globally is dominated by the big four, who are originally audit companies but actually are mostly consultancy firms now, plus three more which are pure consultancy firms. So I will call them actually the big seven. In the consultancy space, there is the big seven. Now the big seven dominate not just the world, they also dominate India. Now the problem is that globally, this business has a very large pool of Indian talent that functions, including in the global, in the big seven. You go anywhere in the world, you'll find Indian auditors, Indian consultants, Indian gyan giving. We are good at gyan giving, so I suppose everywhere you will find Indians. But we are all working for these big seven. We don't have Indian big seven. Not a single one of them is Indian, even though they are full of Indians working there. So I began to look into this matter some months ago, and this is what I discovered. The problem is, the reason we don't have an Indian big seven, in fact, forget the world, we don't even have a big seven inside India. I mean, even inside India, the global big seven dominate everything. The reason for that is threefold. The first problem is something at least discussed, which is that our own tendering systems, particularly of even government or even of private sector or public sector, but private sector also, tends to be done in a particular way in which essentially an Indian company finds it very difficult to break into the system. So, for example, there will be a contract for just 2 crores. Let's say there's a 2 crore project. But then it will then have the company will in its thing, will say that this 2 crore project can only be bid for by a consultancy which has a 500 crore turnover. Now, why do you need a 500 crore turnover to do a 2 crore project? You tell me. Now, obviously, in that situation, no Indian company can even enter the field. Then, furthermore, the way the track record is measured is only done to the firm. So, let's say there are 3 people who are working there, they know how to do some activity. They work for one of the big 7 companies. They want to split off and create their own startup. And every other field we say, oh yeah, great startup, we should support him, etc. But here, we will actually penalize them because the track record will be kept with the original company and will not be given to the consultants. So net result is these large number of Indians working for foreign firms who are doing all of this great stuff globally cannot actually split off and create an Indian big 7 company as a startup. They just won't be allowed, no matter how talented they are. Because we ourselves don't give them credit for their track record. I'm just giving, this is for the tendering process. This is just one problem, but at least this is something we are cognizant of in the government, and maybe we're thinking of ways to get around it. The real big problem that I've discovered lies somewhere else. It's actually not in the government, even though the government is blamed because of this tendering issue all the time. The real problem actually lies with the professional bodies of this country. Whether it's the Bar Council of India, the Indian Chartered Accountants Institute, chartered whatever, company secretaries, whatever, architects, engineers, whatever it may be. Essentially, all of them basically have created a bunch of rules which means that you can not create multidisciplinary practices. Because when you give some consultancy project, it requires all kinds of people. It needs a lawyer, it needs an accountant, it may need an engineer, it may need an IT specialist, it may need an MBA, it may need all kinds of people, and it's a PwC will provide all of those guys. But in India, you cannot create it, it's very complicated to create it. Although in theory, the ICAI at least allows it in theory. The others don't even allow it. I mean, Bar Council of India doesn't even allow it. So you cannot create a McKinsey in India, whether you like it or not. You cannot create a Deloitte in India. So what happens is that all of these firms create their brand abroad, and in India they function through proxies. So the big 7 are functioning in India, but we cannot create our own big 7 because our own professional bodies will say no. A lawyer's firm can only have advocates there. That's it. They can the only people who can be partners there. If a chartered accountant wants to join a lawyer's firm, even though they're going to jointly work, he will be not allowed as a partner. And as I said, even the chartered accountants guys have problems, but at least they are slightly more open. Most of the Bar Council of India and all these other professions don't even allow this. So now net result of this is, because of our own webs in our own head, we are unable to create global practices. Because inside India you do whatever you want. When you want to go to the rest of the world, what will happen? And of course, when you go to the rest of the world, they will ask you for a brand. Now, our laws of all these professional bodies actually explicitly ban you from having logos and branding. So when you go to an event or something, you see KPMG or Deloitte or McKinsey, etc. are sponsoring it, you'll never see an Indian company sponsoring it because they're not allowed to brand. Now look at the absurdity of the situation. In India, all these guys basically function through a local subsidiary or proxy, whereas the brand is from their global operations. So the global operation brand is used everywhere. Whereas here they are, operate under something, and in fact it's even worse than that. There are two audit firms that are allowed in India to function in their own name because they had registered themselves before independence. So they were grandfathered at the time all these rules came. So this is the ultimate form of colonialism. We don't allow our own guys to build brands, but we not only allow foreign guys to do, we give them exclusive rights to do it. So whether it's because of our tendering system, our inability to create brands or not allowing people to build brands, not allowing multidisciplinary partnerships, the net result is that we ourselves do not allow a big seven to emerge from India. It is our problem. It is not the world. The rest of the world is happy for us to turn up. We ourselves are not. So we are creating free trade agreements and services, all kinds of things we are doing. We will not be able to take advantage of it. The best we will manage is to continue to work as GCCs, captive GCCs for multinationals. But we cannot actually create our own companies for ourselves. And this is all to do with cobwebs in our own heads.
Are you hopeful that some of this will change, Sanjeev?
Well, I can tell you in the government there is a lot of support for this, but you see the professional bodies have to change their own mindset. Everybody is basically trying to protect their own little pond, and I keep telling them the real game is sailing on the high seas.
This is very, very typical. And since you mentioned sailing on the high seas, I must come to the third topic that I want to discuss with you, Sanjeev, which is literally sailing on the high seas. Congratulations, your boat is now sailing very successfully. Talk to us a little bit about, I often hear that India, in the last decade, India has grown a deeper sense of its maritime history thanks to the work of people like you, but it still doesn't have a real a maritime consciousness, so to speak. Do you think this project of this wonderful stitch ship will take us one more step forward in building this maritime consciousness?
Yes, this is the attempt. So let me explain why this is a bigger project than a cultural project. You see, we do not have a maritime consciousness at all as a country. And so since independence, we have got this strange landlocked view of the world. But you see, if you have a maritime view of the world, it's completely different. If you have a landlocked view, our neighbors are only China and Pakistan and those kinds of countries. If you have a maritime view, our neighbors are Australia, Indonesia, Oman, and totally different kind, UAE, those are different kinds of countries. So a maritime worldview is very different. And I keep pointing out to people, this is bizarre that we do not have a maritime view when we have the only country with an actual ocean named after us, the Indian Ocean. And from an economic perspective, we are actually an island country. We do not trade with our western neighbor Pakistan, and while we do trade with China, we don't trade with the part of China with which we have a border. We trade with Shanghai, not with Lhasa, for the most part. So therefore, from an economic perspective, we are an island nation just like Britain or Japan. And we should begin to think like this. Now, the problem is when I put this out, then one obvious problem pops up, which is that 95% of all of India's goods trade is carried on foreign ships. A large number of them increasingly built in China. And in containers also, largely also built in China. So, if you ask me what is India's biggest geostrategic and economic vulnerability, I will tell you the fact that we do not at all control any of our maritime interests at all because of this huge dependency. India only has some 480 properly ocean-going ships. I'm not including here, local fishing trawlers and all. Proper ocean-going ships, we have about 480. China has over 6,000. So I have been making the point that look, we need to really get into shipbuilding, we need to change the rules on ship ownership, we need to change the rules on flagging, all kinds of things. And you will have seen in the last 18 months to 2 years, we have done a lot of work in terms of changing the rules. There's a lot of emphasis on shipbuilding, etc. Now that is happening in a sectoral basis. But what I'm trying to do is one step beyond that. You see, why did we get in here in the first place? And what is the danger that, after, there's some enthusiastic minister or secretary or something who's pushing this, and maybe the prime minister is pushing this, so you're getting some momentum. What is the thing that, a few years from now, these are long-term, multi-decade agendas. How can we make sure that we just doesn't just fritter away? For that, you have to do something more, which is to create a maritime consciousness which is deeply inside us. So as a part of that agenda, I said, look, we have to go past just changing some laws and policies and, maritime fund or whatever it is. We have to make Indians revive their maritime consciousness and a sense of history. And it is important because actually India has one of the longest maritime histories of any country in the world. We go back before the Phoenicians. Everybody talks about the Phoenicians. Actually, way back in the Bronze Age, before the Phoenicians, Indians from Gujarat were sailing to Oman, to Bahrain, to all the way through to Mesopotamia. So we have the oldest maritime history and heritage of any country in the world, and yet we don't celebrate it at all. So one of the things we are doing, one is, of course, there is a new museum coming up in Lothal, but I thought there would be something that is even more active, which is to build and demonstrate a Gupta period ship. So a ship from 1500 years ago, 1500-year-old ship. So I said, how do we build one? So I began researching the issue. And it turns out, of course, the ships at that time were built with a peculiar technology called stitching. So they stitched the ship together. They didn't nail it together, they stitched it. There's a lot of reasons why they did it. So I began to explore this technology. I discovered that there was a coin, Satavahana coin, which showed this. I found a painting in Ajanta which depicted a ship. There was a book called Yukti Kalpataru from a slightly later period, which I also looked through. And there are also travelers to the Indian Ocean who describe these stitched ships. So I used all of this, and there is some living tradition of building small boats also using a stitching technique. They don't build big ships, but at least there was some living tradition which last generation who remembered it, so I caught hold of those guys and I put it together to a project to build actually a Gupta period ship. So for the last 2 years, we have been working on this. Of course, this is something we have, I have to thank the blessings of the Honorable Prime Minister who saw the why I was trying to do it and gave it full support. And then, of course, the Ministry of Culture came in, gave us funding. We built a ship which was built in Goa in a shipyard called Hodi, and with the help of a traditional craftsman called Babu Sankaran, who is the last generation of people who have some memory of how these stitched ships were built. And putting all of this information and knowledge together, we have actually built the ship. And only in May, that is last month, we went on 21st of May, we launched it in Karwar, which is, as you know, the Navy base. And so this ship is now a Navy ship called INSV Kondinya. So right now it's lying in the harbour because we don't want it to be knocked around in the monsoons. But once the monsoons stop, we will take it out and have to learn how to sail it, because nobody knows actually how to sail these ships. It doesn't have any modern sailing, rigging is different. So it has square sails, doesn't have lantern sails. The hull is flexible because stitched, not nailed. It doesn't have a rudder, it's got a steering oar hanging out of the back, and all kinds of other features which are very archaic. So nobody in the world really knows how to sail it, we'll have to figure it out.
Fascinating.
And then the idea is at the end of this so if we figure out how to sail this, and assuming it all goes well, then the idea is to attempt in December to sail it from India, from Gujarat to Oman.
Oman, yes. I think you mentioned Oman, yes. That's right. Fascinating. Well, I do hope that this is the beginning of us really gaining this maritime consciousness that you're talking about. And of course, the museum in Lothal and other projects undoubtedly will help. Well, thank you very much, Sanjeev, for spending time and talking to me about all these issues. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk to you again as all of these stories develop, so to speak. And congratulations on all the great work that you have been doing and are still doing. And I wonder whether you're going to get up on that ship and try some sailing yourself.
Of course, that's the whole idea. I intend to be on that first voyage to Oman.
That's amazing. I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun. Thanks very much, Sanjeev Sanyal, for your time. Thanks indeed.
Thank you.